Okay. All right. Well, we are continuing to learn from the story that God recorded for us about David's life, and we're up to 2 Samuel chapter 13. And we've seen the turning point in David's life was in chapter 11 when he gave in to his sin of lust, that he violated Bathsheba and he murdered Uriah the Hittite. And from that point, David's life begins to go downhill. But the sad part was the message that was given to him was that as a result of his failure, that damage was going to be created in his family, that his whole family system now was going to be affected by his sin. And there's an interesting question about that. Like, David repented. Why did still there end up being problems continuing in his family? And maybe that's a question for further discussion, but we're going to see. We saw last week the horrific, the wicked, the evil that came through his firstborn son, Ammon, who raped his sister, Tamar. It's just a horrendous scene that we read about, just so horrible. But now we need to look at when injustice and evil takes place, how should we respond? And we're going to look at 3 people's responses who respond in 4 ways. And we need to see that none of them respond in the way I think that God would have had them respond. And so we have to ask ourselves that question too. How should we respond to injustice and evil? And so let's go ahead and look and see what we should do here. Okay. So in verse 17, Ammon does another despicable thing after having raped his sister. He throws her out of the house. And verse 18 says, now she was wearing a long robe with sleeves, for thus were the virgin daughters of the king dressed. So his servant put her out and bolted the door after her. And Tamar put ashes on her head and tore the long robe that she wore. And she laid her hand on her head and went away, crying aloud as she went. And in verse 20, and her brother Absolom said to her, has Amnon, your brother, been with you? Now hold your peace, my sister. He is your brother. Do not take this to heart. So Tamar lived a desolate woman in her brother Absalom's house. So there's 2 responses we see here. First is Tamar's response. Of course, this action greatly damages a soul. We understand that she was a total victim, that she did nothing to bring this on herself. But what we have to understand is, unfortunately, well, in this particular case, that God wanted to heal her. God wanted to remove her shame. God wanted to restore her in a way. But unfortunately, the counsel that she gets from her brother, which is his response is to try and cover the shame. Maybe he's trying to comfort her, but his approach is, be quiet about this. Don't talk about it. Like, don't take it to heart. Can you imagine? Don't take it to heart. I mean, that could be his concern, but it's not a very helpful thing. It's not a very healing thing, really, when someone has gone through that type of trauma, to just basically say, don't think about it. So we see 2 things here. One is that it seems like Tamar never got the healing that she needed to live a full life. She allowed this evil to sideline her for the rest of her life. Now, I'm not blaming her for what was done to her, but I'm saying that when we are victimized and when we go through trauma, we still have some choices. And those choices are to turn for healing, to seek help, to not allow that to define us anymore, to determine that the evil that was done to us will no longer define our life. And unfortunately, she was in a society that defined women in a negative way, who had been traumatized. She had a brother who reinforced that idea of covering up things. And so this is the first response that we have is the personal response to the injustice that someone has suffered, which is to withdraw and to live a sad, and as the scripture says, a desolate life. This is not the way that God wants us to respond to evil. He doesn't want us to live a desolate life. He doesn't want us to go into unfruitfulness. He doesn't want us to live the rest of our life being defined by the evil that is done to us. And so I think that for whatever reason, it seems as though she didn't receive the grace of God that was available to her. Maybe she didn't have the help to receive that grace. Maybe she didn't have the teaching from her society. But I know that's what God wanted for her. God wanted to minister to her pain and to her heart and to heal her in such a way as that she could still live a life that wasn't desolate. You believe that? I don't think that's God's will for her to be cooped up in the house, to be isolated from other people, to be so withdrawn, to be full of shame, to end up feeling like either the society said no man is going to marry you, or for her to say I'm no longer worthy or I'm unclean to be married. Whichever way, or the compounding of it, it's a tragedy what happened to her, and it's a tragedy the way that she responded to it. I'm not being hard on her. I'm being sad that she, for whatever reason, didn't head toward the Lord in a healing manner. Okay, so we have to ask ourselves, as we go through these 4 responses, we want to, of course, examine ourselves and think about how we respond in our own life to either personal injustice or injustice to someone else. Because the second thing is we see that Amnon, her brother's response, is to either try and keep the family honor or trying to keep it quiet. I mean, that's his first response, is to keep things quiet. Don't, that the whole Me Too movement was basically an attempt to say, let's not be quiet any longer to sexual trauma. Let's not pretend that this didn't happen. Let's speak it out. And I think there's something important and valid to be able to give words to it. Now, I know many of the cultures that are honor and shame based, both the responses are understandable in honor and shame culture that's going on here. I understand that, but that doesn't mean that that's the way of God. Okay. All right, we got to keep going in the story here. Okay. Verse 21, third response. When King David heard of all these things, he was very angry. But then it goes on. In other words, there's no indication in this chapter that King David took any action. He was upset about what happened. He got angry about it. Just like when Nathan the prophet came to him and told him the story, he got very angry. But this third response is one of passivity. David had a responsibility as the king and as a father to address this situation. I was asking Caleb, did your parents try and do anything? Here, David should have done something, not just be angry inside. What should he have done? What do you think? Okay, he's got 2 sons now. He's got his eldest son, Ammon, who's done this terrible thing. And he hears about it. What do you think King David should have done? He should have. That's right. So according to Leviticus, if somebody commits sexual sin in the family, incest, if a brother rapes his sister, he should be put to death. In public. Okay. You okay? Okay. Now you can understand how hard that must have been for David. Why would that have been so hard for David? Right. Exactly. And he was supposed to die. He even pronounced it. The man who did this should die. And God said, oh, your sin is forgiven. You're not going to be put to death. So maybe David thought, well, I received mercy from God. Maybe I should extend mercy to Amnon. You think that's what happened? Or was he so guilty that he had done that he didn't feel like I'm empowered to do it? Any other comments about David here? What do you think he should have done?
Maybe he's feeling guilty because he was
Okay. Oh, because he had come to him, and Amnon had said, "Hey, give me the permission to go in to visit. Send my sister to me." So okay, so maybe he was feeling guilty.
well, God said this would happen.
Yes. One of the great challenges, one of the sorrows in my own life as a father was passivity at the times I should have been active in disciplining my children. I have to admit that is a sorrow in my life, that I say, oh, I was too passive. And we could talk about the family dynamics and all that, but I identify with this response in a sorrowful way, that David thought, oh, how am I going to lose my son? David thought, oh, I'm guilty from what I did. Oh, David thought, wait, maybe I should let him go. I was let go. I don't know what was going on, but I don't. Do you agree? I don't think this is a good response. Passivity is not a good response. As parents, if because we messed up when we were young, and we say, oh, therefore I can't, teach my kids because I did it myself, that isn't a right approach. I'm speaking of parents now. If you're going to be a parent, okay, whatever you messed up in doesn't mean you still don't have the right and authority and responsibility to teach your kids, even though you didn't do it. And even though the kid says, yeah, but what about you? For their sake, for their benefit, you still have to do what's right. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So let's get a vote here. How many of you think David should have followed what was prescribed in the law and had his son put to death? Okay, all right. So these are the serious folks. These are the ones that say justice needs to be done. These are the ones that are going to stand for what God says was the right thing to do. The rest of you are wishy-washy. Well, there's another option. Okay, all right. So you're the advisor to David, and David says to you, what should I do?
You know what the law says?
Yeah.
When you are unworthy of such a judgment, I turn it over to judges or the priest, to somebody. I'm not qualified. I am no longer. God, from God, I've been given grace. I want to give this to my son.
He's the king. He was given the responsibility. He was the father. He was given that responsibility.
He was, but he. That's what my.
Okay, we're activated now. Okay, go ahead. Oh, your kid said, let me do my own. Don't discipline me. Okay. That's true. Oh, that's a little bit different. When if the mistake he commits is against one of your other children, then you have a responsibility to do something. It has to be addressed. Okay.
I guess my point was, okay, so God is the one that gave David.
Yes. Yes.
David is giving mercy, and I know, like, we're supposed to really forgive, show mercy because we give mercy, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't. Forgiveness is when you're like, you were wrong.
Mm-hmm.
This was wrong. You deserve punishment. And even David was told, you deserve punishment, right?
Yeah.
He said, yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I feel like that happened to his son, where he was like, you do deserve punishment, but you'll be blamed. He should ask God.
He should ask God. David should ask God, what should I do? Yeah, there's so many times, David, we saw inquiring of the Lord, right? There's no indication David did any inquiring of the Lord here. This was a tough situation for him. Yeah,
Just like to say that he's not acknowledging that publicly, he should have been his family,
yeah,
was a second sin against him.
it was.
Because she had to bear the weight of both issues.
That's right. That's
She had
right.
to bear the weight of sin,
That's right.
and then there was somebody that her stand up for her
Mm-hmm.
and say this was wrong, I'm sorry, this. That needs to take place for someone to be healed.
Yeah,
That's what it says in Testament, that the elders, all right, are to punish. They were gonna kill the person.
Yeah.
And rectify her sin, not her sin, but rectifies her position
yes.
to get her honor back.
Okay, so let's say we go to the court and someone has, a crime has been committed against someone, and the person is asking for justice, and the judge says, well, I have it in my heart to forgive you today. It's not the we would say, wait a second, what about the victim wants justice? How are you making that decision?
Muslim community has the victim now, you're gonna either live or die.
Okay, yeah. Okay, okay. So let me say a couple things. One is, if you desire to be a leader, be warned. You're going to be put into difficult situations. If you're going to be a father, you're going to be in difficult situations. And you need a lot of grace from God to help you do what's right. And I know, like I said, I feel my own failures in this regard. But let me give us a call here. Don't be like David. Don't be a passive leader. Don't be a passive person who is given responsibilities and not to take those responsibilities. He had something to do that he didn't do. All right, so that's the third response. Now, there's a consequence, I think, to his failure to act. And we're going to see now what happens, okay? Verse 22, but Absalom spoke to Amnon neither good nor bad, for Absalom hated Amnon because he had violated his sister Tamar. After 2 full years, Absalom had sheep shearers at Baal Hazor, which is near Ephraim, and Absalom invited all the king's sons. And Absalom came to the kings and said, behold, your servant has sheep shearers. Please let the king and his servants go with your servant. But the king said to Absalom, no, my son, let us not all go, lest we be burdensome to you. He pressed him, but he would not go, but gave him his blessing. Then Absalom said, if not, please let my brother Amnon go with us. And the king said to him, why should he go with you? But Absalom pressed him until he let Amnon and all the king's sons go with him. Then Absalom commanded his servants, mark when Amnon's heart is merry with wine, and when I say to you, strike Amnon, then kill him. Do not fear. Have I not commanded you? Be courageous and be valiant. So the servants of Absalom did to Amnon as Absalom had commanded. Then all the king's sons arose, and each mounted his mule and fled. So as a result of David's inaction for 2 years, and we see that Absalom is waiting to see what his father is going to do, to see whether justice is going to be obtained for his sister. And when he has this hatred in his heart, and he sees his father not doing anything, he decides, I'm going to take justice into my own hands. He should have been killed. I'm going to kill him. And so the fourth response is revenge. When somebody has, in this case, he picked up the offense of his sister, and he said, something has been done wrong. Justice must be restored. I must have her honor restored. And the way that her honor is going to be restored is by killing this man, her brother Amnon. He hated him, and eventually I don't know if he had the plan right away, because he hated him right away, and he was waiting to see what David was going to do. Also, there's no indication that Amnon ever repented, right? So he's stewing for 2 weeks. He's waiting for the opportunity. And then he does the very thing that happened to his sister. Remember, Amnon came to David and said, send Tamar to me. Now he's going to his father and says, send Amnon to me. David, like, wow, I don't know. And David, I don't know if he picked up on it or not, because he said, no, why are you saying to send Amnon? Was he so, I mean, maybe Absalom was a really good hider, because it says he said nothing to, Amnon about it. He just was doing that. Maybe he fooled his father. Yeah.
I'm not this, I thought it meant that he actually was going to kill David. If he was thinking he was going to kill both of them, or at least David, and again, when I was thinking, well, the anger.
Yeah.
Was so much.
Could be.
I only wanted to go after David too.
Because we see what he does later. That's true. That could have been there. Or it could have been his way of getting the whole family there, including Amnon. But when David said no, he wouldn't go, he still wanted to get Amnon there. Yeah.
Okay, I think it was a real thought now. I think he knew his father so well. He knew David wasn't going to come. And so, since you're not coming, send Amnon. So I think it was like he really planned the whole thing. David wasn't really started. Amnon was started. And so for like David to feel guilty, since you're not coming to this party, send so like that.
That's fine.
Yeah.
That's right.
David also knew Absalom so well for him, like, they want me to send the other guy, what's up? What's happening?
Yeah.
And so I think they both understood each other, but they weren't ready to confront.
Wow. So revenge is a normal, sinful response when wrongs and injustices are done. Because the point of revenge is to say, let me correct the evil by getting back. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. That's a very normal, sinful, natural response. Now, I think most of us here, I think if we read a story like this, maybe you would say, I would never do this. I would never go and kill somebody in revenge. But I want you to think about this. What is revenge? Revenge is simply trying to pay back something that has been done to you or to someone else that you're offended by. And I see in many relationships, many times, I see this in marriage counseling. When I'm watching a couple interact with one another, and the one couple says, well, he did this to me. And then the response is, yeah, but she did this to me. Right? So it's an attack back. If you're going to attack me, I'm going to attack you. And I see that as a minor form of revenge. It's a repay, it's a get back. Well, if you're going to disrespect me, if you're going to hurt me, I'm going to do that back to you. So I don't think we should minimize the sense in which the fact of our response to injustice. Oh, you're saying that about me? Oh, you shouldn't be saying that about me, so I'm going to say something about you. So there's a lot of reactions to injustice that revolve around vengeance, getting back. And yeah.
And I don't think that this is I'm going to be monarchy or whatever. But also, it's like, maybe this is I'm just going to ignore you.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm sorry, I need to move on because we're running out of time. I know you're dying. Okay. I asked you what David should have done. What should Absalom have done? He was waiting for his father to do something. He was maybe he was planning this all along, but what do you think? Are you going to say to Absalom, if he came to you, hey, this is what happened to my sister, and you're going to say, just forgive your brother? Is that what you're going to tell him? No. I thought that's like, what's that?
I'll call David out.
Okay.
My father out, like, hey, Dad, what are you doing? If I call like a mini meeting, call my brother, call David. and they will trash it down.
Okay.
Because of this thing that has happened to me recently, I had to go, like, I know it was making me so pissed off, like, whenever I think about it, I'll get so angry. And I kept, the person tried avoiding me, but I literally dragged the person by the check and I know we are gonna start. Yeah.
Okay. Wow, that's a great response. Anyone else think about if you were Absalom's counselor and he was telling you, I'm going to go and kill Amnon. Man, this is so bad. This is good. This is good. Anything else you want to say? Yes, yeah.
Tell him to talk to his father.
Okay, that's similar. Yeah, yeah. That's good. Okay, yeah, Christian.
Apart from Ammon, but he could have tried to restore Tamar.
Okay, he could have done that too. Although it's interesting, how could he have done that? What could he have done? Such a difficult situation. I agree, but I don't know what the path is. I think because in some way, this is where why there's so much hostility in the Middle East is because when something happens now, if it was just eye for eye, there'd be a lot of lost eyes. But now it's you gave me an eye, I'm going to poke out both your eyes, right? And oh, you did that, I'm going to kill 10 of you. And so it's just that the revenge is so strong in honor cultures, and that's we see people kill their own family members sometimes because of that. It's a tragedy. Okay.
Tomorrow, she's on the Anna, don't do this evil thing, because it's bad for you. I think I was on the advisor, I think, you're right, justice should have gotten. But don't do this evil thing by killing your brother and seeking justice yourself. Give it up to
This reminds me of a situation earlier in David's life when David was offended at Nabal, and he felt like I'd done all this stuff for Nabal, and I asked him for a little sheep. It was the same sheep shearing time, same time of the festival of shearing the sheep. And he said, I'm going to go kill him. And Abigail came out and said, don't do this. Think about the consequences. Think about your reputation. Think about your future. And David said, oh, thank you. If it wasn't for you, I definitely would have killed Nabal. But God had a way of dealing with Nabal that went beyond him. So I think David needed an Abigail, or let me say, Absalom needed an Abigail to say to him, don't do this thing. You may be satisfied for a moment. You may feel good that Amnon got justice, but afterwards, it is going to have so many consequences in your life. And don't do it. He needed that counsel. So, brothers and sisters, and we know the Lord says, do not weep, do not take vengeance. Trust the Lord. We know that the Bible tells us to bless our enemies instead of cursing them. Oh, learn from this story and learn the tragedy of what happens in families when there's passivity, when there's cover up of shame, when there is a revengeful spirit. Oh, this is such a sad story. And yet, which of our families does not have dysfunction in it? And so we're going to keep learning from David how we should do things differently. Yes, Valerie. Yeah.
That's great. That's something. Give Ammon that time, I think he can